When did your boss prove they got your back against Karen? I once worked as a barista at a coffee shop, and there was this one woman who was constantly rude to me. Once COVID started, after the quarantines lifted, my boss had to step up and help around, as there were almost no other workers besides me, and he realized how rude customers were, as he was just managing the coffee shop and not actually dealing with people. At one point, while he was complaining to me about some rude customers, I told him about this woman and how she acted towards me and asked to refuse her any service. He just went, "Yes, sure, go ahead. If she has a problem, just send her here." So the next day when she arrived and demanded her usual, I just went, "Nah, I'm not giving you anything anymore," and sent her towards my boss as she started to curse at me, knowing full well he's got my back this time and she's not going to get shit. By the way, ours was the only coffee shop in the mall and she was passing there every day. You had to walk a bit outside if you wanted a machine-made coffee. She threw a tantrum after my boss told her she's banned and got escorted out by security. She's now also banned from the mall, lol. Have you ever witnessed Karen meeting the badass manager? I used to have a coworker who was strange. We used to go to the same barbecue joint every Friday, and without fail, my coworker would order a wagon, no wheel. The person working the register, usually someone different every week, never knew what he was talking about, so he'd have to explain that he wanted a chuck wagon sandwich with mummun. We went through this every week for probably a year. One day, a new soda dispenser had been installed, and a guy was looking it over as we got our drinks. The guy asked us how we liked the dispenser. We told him that it was nice, and he thanked us, then explained that he was the owner of the place. My coworker immediately started ranting about how he needed to hire smarter people to work the register. The owner wanted to know more, and coworker explained that the never knew what a wagon, no wheel was. The manager asked, "What the hell is a wagon, no wheel?" My coworker explained. "Jesus Christ," exclaimed the owner. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. What kind of idiot thinks he can make up names for things that aren't on the menu?" Then he looked my coworker dead in the face and asked, "Are you some kind of moron, pal?" Coworker stammered that he wasn't, and the owner said, "Then quit saying stupid shit to my staff. Order off the menu or get out." We ate our lunches and coworker never ordered a wagon, no wheel again. When did you shut down an entitled Karen? What was the aftermath? Doctor here. I used to work in a public night shift service, kind of like an emergency room, but for non-emergencies to keep the hospitals clear of white codes, so anything from a fever to a sore throat to prescriptions for urgent treatments. And a Karen walks in at 3 a.m. asking for a prescription for hypertension drugs, which isn't unusual, as people sometimes don't notice they're running low. Anyway, the law, not a rule, not my decision, the law states that this service can only write prescriptions for potentially life-threatening conditions drugs for a maximum of 72 hours coverage. So if you take one pill a day, I can only prescribe you a single blister. Here, we don't have bottles, but blisters. And while I'm writing the prescription, Karen casually mentioned that she was insomniac, and while cleaning the medicine cabinet, she realized she was down to her last full blister. My pen stops. I ask her to repeat, "Full blister?" "Yeah." So I take the prescription, tear it in half, then I throw it in the bin, explaining her the law. She gets mad, starts yelling and threatened to call the cops. Go ahead. Cops came, and she triumphantly announced that I'm refusing to treat her. I explain the situation, and they ask her if it's true that she has a full blister, and she, of course, being a Karen, who is always right, no matter what, confirms it. The cops look at her, still with a look of triumph, waiting for them to arrest me, then at me, then ask her politely to leave, as I'm in the right. She's livid. The day after, my boss called me and cracked up because she went there during the day to talk to the manager, and she, my boss, told her the exact same thing. Never saw her again in there. Restaurant workers. When did you got angry at an entitled customer? Worked at a pizza shop as a delivery driver when I was younger. Shop was owned by 3 extremely polite, professional, and hard-working Russian men, 2 brothers and a cousin. Took a delivery right down the street. I'm talking a 1/10 of a mile. Guy comes out hot about how they shouldn't have someone with such a heavy accent taking orders because nobody can understand what the fuck he's saying, and he just wants his order correct. I let him know that I'll pass on the message. I go back and tell the owner that took the order about this guy's complaint. Owner immediately calls him, tells him that if he doesn't like the way he speaks, then he can fuck off and order from somewhere else, since he was too lazy to drive 30 seconds to place the order in person. Ended it with, "Do you understand my English now?" I think we just saw Spider-Man. When I go to school, I take the bus, and every single day, the last kid to be picked would always be late, and we would watch as he slowly walked to the bus without a care in the world, while all the kids screamed to hurry up. We always told him to wake up earlier or just simply run, but he didn't want to listen. So in short, we were always late for first period. Then one day we stopped at the pickup spot, and as usual, the kid walked toward the bus, and all the kids were yelling at him to hurry up, and the kid put up the middle finger. Then the bus driver had enough and started to drive off, and the kid had to run almost a kilometer after the bus like Peter Parker did in the first Spider-Man movie. When did you witness good karma in action? My little brother got a grass-cutting job for this older, single woman when he was young. He cut it, weeded it, took care of stuff for her, minor repairs, oil changes, etc. As we grew older, he continued cutting her grass and doing things for her for over 30 years. He never charged her because she was old, frail, needy, and he was such a great guy. When his divorce came after his wife cheated and took his money and house, the old lady let him stay in her garage apartment until he could get back on his feet. Long story short, He worked for free for years, and when she died, the old lady left him the house he had taken care of for so long. It sold for $350,000 in Nashville, and he retired 4 years early. Good deeds really does pay off. When did you activate malicious compliance on a greedy boss? When I was in construction, I dealt with one owner who had no concept of workload management. He would just take projects without thinking about any of the logistics and run people absolutely ragged. One time, his dumbass took a huge project on a school that was over 2 hours away from where any of us lived. When we complained, he said something like, "Well, if you don't like it, you can go find another job," with a smug look on his face. Well, we all quit and got different jobs. About 2 weeks later, he called me in an absolute panic. He had nobody for his project. The school was coming down on him hard about the work not even being started. He really needed us to come back. No apology or admission of fault, just come back to work already. Again, we already had new jobs, so all I said to him was, "You did this to yourself," and hung up. What's your most satisfying instant karma story? My ex cheated on me and spread some pretty awful rumors about me to boot. It fractured our group of friends, but later on, we all went to support a mutual friend at a play of theirs. It was awkward. She shit-talked me in close quarters. It was very windy that particular day due to a storm a few states away. She drove off after the play, and I'm talking a huge, massive tree branch fell on her car hood, crushing the engine at the stoplight outside of the little community theater. Her months-old brand-new car was totaled, and she had to spend the next few years riding the bus because her dad refuses to get her another car. Oh, and she did the same thing to the guy she cheated on me with. Used him, cheated, talked shit. He was amazed it also happened to him, as he later told people. What's your horrible boss story? I finally landed a great job with an attorney that I had worked with in the past. I remember him being a kind but funny man. When I started as the office manager, everything was great. He was really nice, helped me with my questions, etc. Then after a couple years, he turned on me so damn hard. If a mistake happened, he would punch the wall or stomp his feet. Stuff that he did wrong would be twisted into me thinking I did it wrong, when in reality, it was him. He has hit me upside the head to when I didn't quite type fast enough for him. I could never leave my desk to go to lunch, no matter what it was. I couldn't even go to doctor's appointments without getting the runaround and guilt trip. If my daughter needed to be picked up at school, I would get, "Well, can't you get someone else to do it?" No, asshole. That's not how it works. I couldn't even take a vacation without him calling fuming. He couldn't find something, even though he was the one that placed it. Those were reserved for after work, according to him. When I bought a new house, that was the last nail in the coffin. He treated me so damn poorly after that. I had saved up enough money and sold my previous house to get my new one. He was insanely jealous, saying it took him years to move into the house he recently just bought, etc. Since being out of that job, I have a sense of peace now, even though I still get a little bit anxious when something goes slightly wrong. I like my new position. He can go fuck himself, that asshole. When did your dream job become a nightmare? I was making peanuts working as a city employee doing drone level work. Ended up getting hired for a mid-level technical job with unlimited growth potential at a Fortune 10 company. 6-figure salary, insanely good benefits plus pension, a paid move to one of the biggest cities in the country, and my own personal office with an epic view on the 45th floor. And it was a place where I could direct my massive ambition and professional goals, which had been completely stagnant under my previous life as I saw it. Oh man, it was off the wall. I basically was living the exact life that I dreamed of for about a year. Was achieving accolades at work, was getting fit, was dating a ton. I mean, everything was going so well. And then my boss, who had a bit of a loopy personality, made a colossally bad hiring decision. He added a new member to our expanding team, an employee with clear signs of schizophrenia. And that was it. Within a month, everyone on the team was walking on eggshells around her. She made daily visits to HR to complain about the boss. He ended up being reassigned due to this, and she would launch into screaming fits and attempt to shatter the glass doors in our offices. She was assigned to a number of tasks where the rest of the team depended on her for info, and she would withhold all of it. Boss would shrug his shoulders that there was nothing he could do. She honestly believed everyone was conspiring against her and were out to get her. It became evident that management was fearful of her as well and asked us to compromise professional ethics and much of our engineering teamwork in order to accommodate her. I ended up quitting 18 months after taking the job, with the first 12 months being a dream and the final 6 being an unending nightmare. Eventually I landed at a small firm in a city of 300K with a much more laid-back culture, and my stress level evaporated so much that I basically feel like I'm retired. When did your friend betray your trust? I was in jail, and I met a friend that said he would give me a place to stay, and so I called my bondswoman, and she looked him up and his background, house and stuff, and he was legit, so I agreed to pay $150 for his bail. And when I got back out, he told me to just come by because I didn't have a home anymore. Fast forward to getting out. No transportation, so I walked everywhere, and I went to the address that he gave me, only to find out a family lives there and the house is foreclosed on. He is a bad powder addict that scams people and was in big trouble with the law. Fast forward to probation, mind you. The jail we were in was in the county we both lived in. And for some reason, on one of my last visits to see my probation officer, this guy is sitting in the room I was in when I first started probation. So I told my probation officer what he did to me and that he lied and cheated me out of money, and it left me homeless. She gave him a drug test, and as I was going home that evening, he was booked into jail for failing a drug test. Hopefully he got sober, but I doubt it. I came from the hood and don't snitch, but that was different. He got what he deserved in a karma sort of way. Have you ever seen karma firsthand? I went to the boardwalk with my friend one time, which is a place where you can either walk, bike, rollerblade, etc. When we arrived, they asked me if I wanted to bike or rollerblade, and I said I always walk when I come here. And they said I'm either going to bike or rollerblade, and they didn't give me a choice. His mom wouldn't back me up either, and no one said anything about this before we arrived. So I chose rollerblades because I had a little experience with it, even though I was horrible at it. Biking I had never done before, and there were no training wheels. So I put on the rollerblades, and they had no pads or a helmet. Of course, I fell and hurt my knees. I don't know why they made me do it, or why they had no protective gear to go with it. His mom got to walk, so that wasn't fair either. Being I was going ridiculously slow, he and his other friend wanted to go ahead of me and his mom, so they did. Few minutes later they came back, because my friend fell off his bike and landed on his nuts. That's what he gets for making me rollerblade without any protective gear and without giving me a choice or any warning. What was the creepiest thing you've ever experienced? Me and my mom saw someone or something watching us sleep. I was about 5 or 6 years old, and my mom was putting me to sleep. I fell asleep, and when I woke up in the middle of the night, I saw a dark figure, like a weirdly positioned man, standing in front of the window. I woke my mom up, almost about to cry, and I was hoping it was just a tree or something, because we were on the second floor of the house. But when she woke up, she also saw what happened and told me to stay put and don't move. She quickly ran to the living room because we had guests over, and everyone was still up drinking. She told everyone what happened, and for 3 hours, everyone went out and searched around the house. What I didn't tell her was that when she left, the window started to rattle, as if someone was trying to open it. I was scared and never slept on my own in that room ever again. What's your I met a celebrity horror story? I saw Justin Bieber throw a shit fit because he ended up not getting what he wanted. We have a quarterly team building exercise at my company where you basically go and play mini golf or some other activity capped at $25 per person. Sometime between 2009 and 2011, I really can't remember exactly, my group just decided to go for a fancy lunch in downtown Portland. After lunch, we took one of our coworkers to the semi-famous Nike store, which was a couple of blocks away, and that was the day Justin Bieber happened to show up. When he and his entourage arrived, he said something somewhat loudly along the lines of, "Y'all are gonna have to leave for a bit, cause I'm here to do some shopping." And some of his people acted like they were going to try and politely force the already present customers out of the store so Bieber could shop alone. But the Nike employees even more politely told him that was not possible. At that point, Bieber lost it. I mean, he threw a total tantrum because they wouldn't shut down the store for him. The tantrum didn't work, and he and his folks left in a huff. That's really my only celebrity in the wild encounter, and it's freaking lame. Students. When did the asshat teacher finally got what they deserve? Not a teacher, but the principal. He was always a little too familiar with students, grabbing shoulders, trying to play wrestle, hugging, and always trying to join conversations. A very much hello fellow youth kind of guy. Multiple students tried to report how uncomfortable he made them, but since he was the principal, it went nowhere. Parents started talking about it at PTA meetings. His excuse was he just wants to bond with the student body. Anyway, the year after I graduated is when karma happened. He snuck up behind a student to try and play wrestle. The student in self-defense dropped the principal. Basically, the principal came up behind the student and put him in a gentle headlock. The student grabbed the principal's arms and bent over quickly, flipping the principal over his head and landing flat on his back in front of the student. The landing caused the principal's back to break, I believe in multiple places. The student immediately panicked and screamed for help, staying with the principal until the ambulance came. It was completely a reaction on instinct because the student thought he was being jumped by another student. Principal learned the really hard way not to put your hands on students. Restaurant workers. When did you see a calm parent snap at their spoiled brat? This one I handled myself. I waited tables in a breakfast diner a few years back. 2 ladies come in and tow one of their kids along. A chubby boy with gold chains and a nice watch. Kid is probably 10 to 11 for reference. Mom is clearly very tired of dealing with him, as he is very demanding, blurts out what he wants before I can give the menu, offer drinks, or even say hi, etc. Partway through the meal, he holds up his Sprite cup and shakes it at me and utters only the word, "more." Mom looks aghast and chastises him for being rude, to which he begrudgingly apologizes. I shrugged and told him, "Don't apologize to me, apologize to your mom." Was a little worried when I came back around with his Sprite and saw his salty, hot tears streaming down his chubby face. Mom left me a 10 on a $30 bill, however, so I think she was happy with my service. When did everyone had enough of the spoiled brat? Saw a college guy with a ridiculously expensive car, can't remember the model, rear-end this woman who drove an absolute beater. Her car was definitely totaled, and his wasn't looking that hot either. He got out and started screaming at this woman. She was in tears. He kept telling her that she was going to pay for this. When the cops came, I saw each of them give their statements. After that, Me and like 10 people came forward and gave our witness statements. It sounded like each and every one of us put complete fault on him, which was the truth. When the cops went back to him, I saw his face just sink. He probably told them it was her fault and just found out that 2 handfuls of people just confirmed that he's full of shit. I've never seen that many witnesses stick around for a simple traffic accident. I think the other people felt the same way I did. That kid was a douche and should be punished for what he did. When did the rich, spoiled brat finally got humbled? One of my college roommates was very rich growing up. I didn't realize just how rich until I had to explain to her what a coupon was in very extensive detail. On multiple occasions, she bragged that she wasn't even interested in her major, philosophy, or college in general, but she was at university because her parents were requiring her to get a degree, any degree, in order to get access to her trust fund. I don't remember ever seeing her go to class, and she eventually got expelled at sophomore year over academic dishonesty. I guess this was the last straw for her parents because they cut her off pretty soon after that. This actually served as a wake-up call. She somehow managed to get a public health degree at a different school in spite of the academic dishonesty listed on her transcript. She's doing pretty well for herself these days. We've kept in touch, and last we talked, she was considering grad school. Service workers of Reddit. What the grossest thing you've seen? I was working at a Pizza Hut at the time. Some kid around age 10 or so went into the men's restroom and shat in the urinal, then proceeded to smear it all over the goddamn place. We knew it was the kid due to it not being very busy that day, and a coworker spotted the mess right after the kid left the bathroom. We weren't sure what to do, but the manager decided to tell the parents. The father was pissed. He made the boy clean it up. He stood over him, yelling at him, and made him clean it all. The boy was crying, but fuck that kid. He was old enough to know you don't do that shit, pun intended. He wasn't mentally impaired. He was just an asshat. We were all glad that the dad stepped up. Otherwise, we would have had to clean it. TLDR, 10-year-old brat smeared his own shit all over a Pizza Hut. His father made him clean it up. Divorce lawyers. What the pettiest thing you've witnessed in court? Had a husband and wife go toe-to-toe over an ashtray. That's right, a freaking ashtray they got in Vegas at some point. Neither smoked, strangely enough. Spent nearly $5,000 for me and another attorney to duke it out in court over the silly thing. Prior to proceeding, I explained what the cost would be for to argue over something silly like this, and that he could give me $2,500, and I would fly to Vegas for the weekend and get him an identical one instead. He said he didn't care about the costs because he intended to smash it on the courthouse steps in front of her if we won. We won, and he followed through with the smashing. He laughed and said the look on her face was worth much more than $2,500. People get crazy in divorce proceedings. Lawyers of Reddit. How did you expose the opposing team lying in court? My brother is a divorce attorney. His most memorable case, he was representing a guy in a divorce custody battle who was accused of horrific child abuse. Very graphic, very detailed depositions from the young kids against daddy. Things look grim. Then my brother, a failed actor, notices the deposition transcript, done by social workers under oath, contains a question at the end from one of the kids. Did I hit my marks? He wonders how little kids know about acting jargon. Subpoenas wife's personal checking account during discovery. Sure enough, acting lessons. Deposes an extremely sketchy acting coach, and panicked coach produces DVDs of practice interrogations with the kids, hours of coaching the kids on exactly what imaginary things to say about daddy. He says it was his one and only Perry Mason moment in 20 plus years of practice, and dad got sole custody of the kids. Have you ever lived in a haunted house? I lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment for a year or so and loved it. About 3 or 4 months in, I got a girlfriend, and she started staying over a few times a week. One morning, we were having breakfast, and with a very serious look on her face, she wants to talk to me about my sleeping habits. According to her, every time she'd stayed over, at some point in the night, I'd wake up and sit on the end of the bed, eyes open and facing the cupboard, and I would have a conversation with someone. Never for longer than 15 minutes, and I'd crawl back into bed when I was done. She said she could only hear my voice, and that there were pauses, like I was listening to someone, and then I'd respond. Sometimes I'd laugh, and interestingly, there was also another language involved, which she would hear me translating things for it back into English. I don't remember a thing. After this conversation, I started to monitor the cupboard and realized that despite closing the cupboard door before bed each night, it was always open in the morning. In this same apartment, I also had exploding head syndrome once. I moved out shortly after all this, and according to her, I never spoke to a cupboard in my sleep again. Lawyers, who was the guy that forced the government to make a new law. I worked with this one guy who had a lengthy record. He had a system for getting released if he got caught. After committing a crime, if the police were in pursuit and he knew he was about to be cornered, he would act insane. His girl would play along with it, telling the police that he was off his medication. The police would arrest him, but then send him to a mental ward with papers instructing the ward to release to police once he was cleared. Once he was in the mental ward, he would cause a distraction that would make the person attending the desk with the file cabinet to leave said cabinet. He would then crawl to the file cabinet, look for his release to police papers, and then would literally eat the papers. When the psych evaluators decided that he was stable enough to be released, there would be no instructions to send him to the police, and he would be released to the general public. He did this about 10 times until police officers noticed him back on the streets. This stunt forced the state to change their procedure for detaining mentally unstable suspects. EMTs. What was the most disturbing thing you've seen while on the job? This one wasn't mine, but from an EMT friend of mine. It's also maybe not so much disturbing, but more like nasty, but it makes my hair stand on end whenever I think on it. In one of the apartments in a nearby city, the apartment manager went in to investigate a really bad smell in one of the lower units. Apparently, people all around it were complaining. Once he saw what was up, he called the ambulance. So first the responders show up, which includes my said EMT friend, and there's this lady sitting on the couch. There's also something squirmy going on down below in her underpants area. So they check her out and in the process remove said undergarments. Out falls a swarm of maggots. Yes, her lady bits were covered in them. Apparently said individual had a fairly strong substance abuse problem. Some of the needles she poked into her nether area caused an infection. This led to rotting flesh, which attracted flies, which in turn led to maggots. The worst part, she was so drugged up that she basically never noticed that she was literally rotting and falling apart from the waist down. What made you quit your job on the spot? Worked for a newspaper, editing and actually putting the paper together, arranging it all, placing stories and pictures where they need to be, titling, quoting, and sourcing everything. I was a one-man team and used an overly complicated system that I figured out how to use really effectively. They treated me like dirt, set impossible deadlines, and berated me for not meeting them. One day the boss tells me to fully put a paper done by the end of the day, gave me no warning. I had no articles from the journalists and no photos from photographers. It was my job to collect it all from everyone, and he wants me to do it in a single day. I told him no. If he wants it done, he has to give me more time. He tells me if I don't have it done by the end of the day, then I'm fired. I tell him that this paper can't function without me. He tells me I need to take the day off and cool my temper, and that he'll do my job for me. Got a call an hour after I get home that he needs me to come in and do it, and I can have as much time as I need. Promptly quit on that asshole. Fuck your shitty newspaper. How did you flip the bird at your horrible boss? Worked a job where I was the only one who knows how to take apart, clean, fix, and put all the equipment back together and do the weekly and monthly maintenance. Had a boss tell me one day that I was doing a poor job and not doing enough, and that anyone could do it, that if I didn't step up, I would be fired. Or else, as they had manuals for each piece of equipment. So that night, I took apart all the equipment, weekly and monthly stuff too, cleaned them, and then just left it apart for them to figure out that morning. Then I turned off my phone after getting home for the entire day, as I had the day off. When I turned it back on the next day, I saw that I had initially received angry texts ordering me to return and put everything back together. This lasted an hour. Then texts saying I risked being fired. Then texts begging me to return. Then more texts trying to compromise with OT. Then an apology, before nothing else for the rest of the day. Other than that the head boss wanted to see me as soon as I came in the next day. Came in the next day, and over half the stuff was still not put together. And what had been put together was put together haphazardly, and would need to be taken out again, then put back in correctly. Was immediately asked to be seen by my boss, and their boss, to explain myself the moment I was seen entering. Once in the office, I told them that if they weren't there to apologize, then just fire me then and there, or drop it, and let me put all the stuff back together. They looked at each other, and then told me that I could get back to work. Boss never called me lazy again. When did you finally got the raise your boss promised? This was about 5 to 6 years ago. I was the second in charge of our shipping department, making $11 an hour. The head of shipping had a mental breakdown, so I took over while he got help. About 3 weeks after he returned, the company released him because they didn't like him, and I could do the job. When they told me they had released him, I asked if there were going to be interviews for the job, Or was the job just mine since I was number 2? I was told they were looking, but I would have a chance to interview once that process started. Fast forward about 6 months, and I'm still doing this job that pays around $50K a year for $11 an hour. We had some issues with staff turnover and process changes because the warehouse manager thought he knew best and would listen. They then tell me there wouldn't be a shipping manager, just a shipping lead, which would be an hourly position. I ask about a raise, get told my review is in 2 months, so just wait. I wait. 3 months. 4 months. Then one day after a 14-hour night shift, I get a call from the warehouse manager telling me I have to come in right now. When I get there, he unloads on me for things that were beyond my control and mistakes other people made. We start yelling, and that's when I told him, I make $11 an hour doing this job. Ex-boss told me he got paid $50K a year to do. I don't need this shit. Give me a raise or I won't be back. I then went home and back to sleep. When I go back to work, I'm met by warehouse manager and ops manager. They appreciate the hard work I've been doing and are putting me on a salary starting at $45K since ex-boss was there longer. I negotiated up to $48K. How did you get back at a horrible coworker? I work in an office with a guy I'll call Seth. Seth is that coworker everyone knows. Lazy, always passing his work on to someone else and somehow always getting away with it. He'll sit around on his phone or go to the bathroom every 10 minutes. He's the kind of guy who will show up late, make some lame excuse about traffic, and then disappear for lunch for 2 hours. For the past 6 months, Seth's favorite target has been me. He'll send emails asking if I can help out with a project, but what he really means is do all the work while I take the credit. I complained to my boss a couple of times, but somehow Seth always managed to weasel his way out of trouble. The final straw came when he passed off a major report that was due to a client in 2 days, dumping it on me last minute. One day I casually asked him if he was good with Excel, and he admitted he didn't know much about it. Perfect. The next time Seth tried to dump a bunch of spreadsheets on me to organize for his next report, I agreed. But this time, I embedded a series of hidden formulas into the documents. These formulas didn't do anything important, just enough to mess with the numbers if someone didn't know how to check for hidden cells. It took me a little time, but I was careful not to make it too obvious. The kicker? Every time Seth tried to copy and paste the data into his report, it would scramble everything just enough to be completely useless. On the day the report was due, Seth slacked off like usual, assuming I had handled it like always. When the client called furious because the report was filled with nonsense numbers, Seth panicked. He rushed to fix it, but every time he tried to fix one part of the report, something else would break. He came to me, frantic, and asked for help. I acted confused and said, "Oh, I don't know what happened. Maybe it's a glitch?" I gave him some vague advice and watched as he spent the entire day trying to salvage his mess. Our boss found out, and for once, Seth couldn't talk his way out of it. He got lambasted for screwing up such an important project and was put on temporary leave without pay. I guess he'll be doing his own work from now on. Redditors, what's the most creative way to deal with a scammer? About twice a year for the past 7 years, I get a phone call from my grandson in jail. I don't have kids, so I've started extending the conversation to waste the scammer's time and save the next person some grief. With one call, I asked him why he was breaking my heart, because he promised me when I was sick in the hospital, he was going to come back to Jesus and stop hanging out with those bad people. Jesus wanted him to not go to jail. Jesus could help him. He promised he'd go to church and be good for Jesus if I sent him $4,000. I told him I'd give Jesus the money, and Jesus would get it to him then. With another call, I asked him why he ruined Christmas dinner by bringing that gold-digging tart that left his brother right before the wedding. He was never welcome in my home again. I never wanted to see either of them. He admitted he made a mistake. She was all wrong for him, and it was her fault he was in jail. Another call. I asked him if he told the police about what happened at the cabin. I explained that sometimes bad things happen, but it was in the past. We have to move on, and we didn't even know what his uncle did, and he couldn't help himself if something did happen. The last call, he asked for money, and I reminded him he had stolen my car and my jewelry. I didn't have anything left other than my Beanie Baby collection that was going to be worth a fortune next year. I just needed to figure out to get them on the eBay. How did you get an asshat arrested? This story takes place about 20 years ago. In the mid-2000s, my friends and I would frequent a small billiards place in a neighboring town where you could rent a table by the hour or play per game. We'd play a few games, watch whatever sports were on TV, and have casual conversations. There were no problems and no drama until about 3 months of us visiting this place. A guy shows and takes our spot at the billiards table. No big deal. We were all chatting anyway. 20 minutes later, my friend lets him know we want to play next game, and the jerk is super dismissive. Needless to say, we didn't get in during the next game, so I politely let him know we wanted to play next. Another lady chimed in that she wanted the game after us. The guy blatantly ignored me and the other woman. Some more time going by, and the guy leave the table. We see our chance to get in. We put the quarters in, and the balls are dispensed, except the green 6 ball. The guy took it to the bathroom with him. At this point, it was ridiculous, and we notified the manager. The manager noted it was 12:30, and they were going to be calling last call and closing, so he didn't want to make a scene by kicking him out. He gets us another ball so we can play. The guy comes out of the bathroom and knows we realized what he did. He smirks and proceeds to the patio to have a cigarette, bringing along his beer and the green billiard ball. The guy comes back in and tossed the ball he was holding onto the table, hitting a few balls on the table and messing up our game. He goes up to the bar, just in time for last call. One of the friends I was with suggested we follow him home and each call the highway patrol to report a suspected drunk driver. 3 of 4 of us agree. So when he leaves, we used our trusty Nextel push-to-talk phones and coordinated several calls to the police. We provided details like license plate, vehicle make and model and color, and mentioned the car nearly hit another vehicle, was swerving between lines and driving erratically. This was under a 15-minute plan. We had no idea where the guy lived, but suspected it was close, as he was visiting a neighborhood place, so our time was limited. The one guy who didn't notify the police tailed the jerk and called us giddy when a police officer pulled between him and the guy and turned in his lights to pull him over. The police blotter that week included an arrest of a guy who was pulled over after multiple calls of erratic driving. He wasn't arrested for DWI, but instead for driving on a suspended license. TLDR, guy was a jerk at a local billiards club, so we got him pulled over by the cops, and he was arrested for driving in a suspended license. What made you instantly walk out of a restaurant? I was with a group of friends, and when we walked in, one of them said, "I don't know about this place. It smells like roaches." We all looked at her funny and kind of chuckled because we didn't think she was serious. None of us have ever smelled roaches before. She explained that her family owned a exterminator-type business and that smelling roaches was definitely a thing, but we agreed to give it a shot. We were seated, got our drinks, and were looking over the menu when a roach appeared on the wall behind me. Without hesitation, I told them I couldn't do it. She was right, and I would politely wait outside for them to finish their meal. Instead, everyone quickly followed, and we found another place to go as a group. And that was the day I learned roaches had a smell. I will never question someone again if they tell me a place smells like roaches. I was so grossed out. Police officers, what's the scariest moment of your career? From the police officer in my family, it was a normal stop on the highway. The car was an old beat-up red Toyota. I switch the lights and the car slowly makes its way to the shoulder and stops. I radio dispatch the info and the plates came back expired, so I walk up to the car. The driver is sweating like crazy, so I know something is up. There's 5 Hispanic middle-aged males in the car, so I pull the driver out and tell the rest to sit tight. Me and the driver walk over to the hood of my patrol car. I tell him his plates are out and whatnot, and he really starts shaking. I asked him what's up, and he tells me the guys in the back are loading a shotgun and are going to shoot me when I go to pull them out of the car. Almost losing my shit, I walk back to my car as casually as possible and radio for backup. Backup comes. We sit the driver in my patrol car, and we order the men in the back seat to get out with their hands up. They slowly agree. They're placed in arrest, and the car is searched. Sure enough, loaded sawn off under the back seat. I let the driver go, and the other guys go to jail, and I get to go home and see my kids for another night. I didn't care that my cheating ex-wife was miserable. I'm male 55, have been divorced from my ex for 12 years. She left me for an old boyfriend on Facebook. I have since moved on and remarried, and am very happy. Since my ex and I had children, we communicated often initially, but now the kids are grown, we don't talk much, and when we do, it is related to our kids and grandkids. When we split and she left to be with this other guy, I was devastated. It ruined our family, and our kids paid the price. Within a year or 2 of our split, this guy she left me for developed a serious illness, and my ex has basically been his caregiver ever since. He passed recently, and my ex messaged me shortly after telling me what happened, and even sending pics of this guy on his deathbed. I didn't respond until a few days later, only to ask her about one of our kids. She hasn't said anything about my lack of response. I feel like I should feel bad about not saying anything like sorry for your loss. However, I am not sorry. I am basically indifferent. I was never mean to this guy. I just didn't think much of him. I could never understand why you would take a woman from her family. My current wife says I shouldn't feel bad about this, as she doesn't care much for my ex or this guy, as she obviously knows the history. Still, I have always been a compassionate person, and I feel bad that I didn't feel bad for my ex. Police officers. Who was the most evil person you've encountered? My dad is a police officer and told me this story once. He responds to a call about a woman standing at the edge of a bridge looking like she's going to jump. Another car radios that they're closer to the bridge, so my dad heads to the underside just in case she jumps. As my dad is getting out of his car, an officer radios that she's tossed a bag or something, and she's gone. My dad gets down to where she landed, and she's died from the impact. The bag was actually her 3-year-old son. Apparently, she was going to lose custody, and that was how she decided to handle it. He told me it's the closest he's ever come to losing it at work, that even though she had died, he wanted to just kick her head in. It probably didn't help that he had 4 young kids at home when that happened. How did you lose all respect for your parents? My bio mom's best friend was diagnosed with the big C. We moved her husband, and her daughter in. My mom slept with her husband and got pregnant, so they put her in a nursing home to wither all alone, just so they wouldn't have to deal with the consequences. She was hours away as well, so her daughter, who was 10 at the time, was unable to visit her. She passed alone because she went to her best friend for help. I don't speak to bio mom anymore. After her friend's passing, she showed off her brand new car with the life insurance money. She married her friend's husband. At the time, her best friend also had a 19-year-old daughter who was homeless with a toddler. I felt so freaking sick sitting in the car listening to her brag about how nice it was and how she finally got the car she deserved. Some people are disgusting. Who's the worst customer you have dealt with? I was working as a software developer and providing second-line support in the hospitality conferencing industry. I had overheard a colleague trying to provide support for something that was clearly the client IT team's fault. Later got a call from the client's MD's secretary wanting to set up a call with our founder to complain that the problem wasn't being dealt with. I said, "I can't call him. I'm really sorry. Please don't ask me why. I know our support people are working on it." Why couldn't I call the founder? Because his wife had that day lost a full-term baby, which I obviously couldn't disclose. Soon after, I got a furious call from the client MD himself. His IT team was obviously lying to him about our not returning calls. I had heard the calls being returned, and he just wouldn't accept that I couldn't call the founder and couldn't tell him why. So eventually, I just hung up on him. I told the most senior person around, expecting to be fired on the spot for hanging up on a client. Her reaction, "Oh yeah, he's not a nice guy. He's physically attacked me in the past." Not the outcome I was expecting. Students, how did you embarrass yourself in front of the class? This was during my sophomore year in math class. I sat between 2 gentlemen. I was really congested that day, and thus pretty tired at the same time. I was resting my head in my hand and hunched over my math book when I felt a sneeze coming. I went to lean back, but apparently didn't move quick enough when the force of this sneeze sent my face hurling into my desk. My head smacked the desk so hard that I bounced back up like a basketball. At that point, I was just dizzy and like, ah! Meanwhile, the 2 guys next to me just completely lose their shit. The one on the right is howling with laughter. The one on the left has his face in his hands and is snorting. The teacher looked at us so confused, and all I could say was, I sneezed. What's your most embarrassing moment at work? So my office threw a Halloween party, and we were encouraged to come dressed in costumes. I wanted to make a good impression since my boss is super into Halloween, and I figured I'd stand out by going all in. After much deliberation, I decided to dress up as a mummy. Classic, right? Except, instead of using a store-bought costume, I thought it'd be more authentic to wrap myself up with actual toilet paper. I spent the whole morning wrapping layer after layer of toilet paper around me. I looked ridiculous, but kind of cool too, or so I thought. I got to the party feeling pretty confident. Things were fine until I got near the snack table where someone spilled punch, and I didn't notice until it was too late. My toilet paper started soaking it up, and before I knew it, I was slowly unraveling and leaving soggy, punch-soaked toilet paper everywhere I went. To make it worse, as I tried to salvage what was left of my costume, I accidentally knocked over a giant pumpkin centerpiece onto my boss. He got covered in punch too. I stood there half unwrapped, drenched and horrified, while everyone just kind of stared. Safe to say I won't be winning best costume this year. TLDR, dressed as a mummy using toilet paper for the office Halloween party. Got soaked in punch, unraveled everywhere, and accidentally knocked a pumpkin onto my boss. Totally ruined the party. Officers of Reddit, what was the wildest story that was actually true? I went to a report of a mentally disturbed person who called police, reporting that the devil called and told him to send people to the shadow realm on the street and then end himself. I checked his previous police files, and he had massive history of mental health issues. He was taken to the mental ward many times and was diagnosed with a form of paranoid schizoid affective disorder. Anyways, my partner and I show up and talk to the guy. He's sweating bullets, eyes darting around, trembling, and totally terrified. He explains that for the last 6 years, the devil calls him nightly via telephone, and then when he calls for help, the police take him to the mental institute. He says the devil tells him to send people to the shadow realm, then end himself. As we are about to call our mental health unit to come talk to him, the phone rings. My partner answers the phone at the guy's request. Guess what? Some freaking bastard was using a voice changer and pranking this dude with mental health issues for years, pretending to be the devil. I can't tell you how surreal that moment was. The poor man's face change, kind of like he's finally been vindicated, and he knows it's not just in his head. So we investigated that prankster and eventually charged him. The guy who had called was so freaking happy. Men who proposed and she said no. What happened next? My friend Aaron had been with his girlfriend Beth for years, so he decided he wanted to propose. What he didn't know is that Beth was also thinking about proposing to him. Aaron proposed first, and Beth freaked out because she had already set her proposal and bought a ring, so she said no. Over the next week, Beth freaked out more and more and refused to answer Aaron's calls and messages. Aaron then decided to use the money he had saved up to buy a plane ticket to Europe. What was supposed to be a 3-month trip through Western Europe turned out to be a year-long trip around the world. One day, Aaron says that he's coming back and Beth decides to go and wait for him at the airport and propose to him there. It turns out that while being in Peru, Aaron met a girl and they fell in love almost immediately and got married in Peru. 5 years later, Aaron and his Peruvian wife are still happily married and recently had a baby, while Beth hasn't still quite forgiven herself for ruining her relationship with Aaron. Retail workers, what was your crazy Karen story? My first job was as a cashier in a grocery store. One day, an older lady, mid-70s, came in with about $43 of groceries. After I ring her up, she pulls out a wad of coupons the size of a baseball and asks me to scan them all. It took me 7 minutes to sort through the coupons and scan them all. Some of them were expired, but I entered them all anyway. And then she pulled out a second wad of coupons, the same size as the first. After a second round with the coupons, her $43 grocery load came down to about 42 cents. She takes her groceries and leaves, only to come back 30 minutes later and file a complaint against me, directly to my boss. The hideous crime I committed? In her giant wad of coupons, I missed a coupon somewhere and overcharged her a whopping 15 cents. She had gotten home, realized it, and drove all the way back demanding her 15 cents and that I'll be written up for my incompetence. My boss filled out the form and the second she left, tore it to shreds, saying, "Yeah, we always get at least one crazy like that a week." Redditors, how did your manager deal with a Karen? I worked at a hardware store, let's build something together, in the lumber department, and our department manager was the coolest guy if you were cool with him. But be an ass, and he don't give a fuck. Multiple times someone would want us to cut something that we weren't supposed to, or physically couldn't cut. But the most memorable was the guy with the board he brought from home and was full of nails. Comes up to me and asks me to cut it. I told him that I can't, because we're only supposed to cut wood that you're buying that day, and it's full of nails. So that's an obvious one. He starts getting pissed and yelling right when my manager walked around the corner. It ended with the guy storming out the front door screaming about how Home Depot would do it for him and we can go fuck ourselves, etc. My manager was right behind him saying, "Well, go on then, we don't give a shit." What was your "you don't have power here" moment? I had a client's daughter try to bully me into printing out the court record for a completely unrelated case. She was supposedly there to deal with her mother's housing case, but asked me to search and print the records on her own divorce, which had nothing to do with our office. When I said no, she tried to insist that I had to do it because she was disabled, which would make getting the records in the normal way harder, and so the Americans with Disabilities Act meant I had to do what she said. I told her flat out that it doesn't work that way. It was almost funny. What were the chances she'd end up working with someone who knows the ADA inside out? This devolved into her just making the demand over and over again and refusing to leave, and me repeating that, "No, we can't do that." She finally demanded to see my supervisor, so I went and got him, and he told her the exact same thing. It was pretty satisfying. What was the new office rule that backfired immediately? We got a new manager for our office. She was an outside hire and was trying to prove herself quickly, and she was obsessed with efficiency. So her first week here, she sent out this very rudely worded email about employees eating at our desks. We have a very small break area, 4 tables, and we have about 300 employees here, and that we all had to stop eating at our desks because it was not efficient to eat and try to work at the same time. Through a coordinated effort by some of the more sassy people at the office, they all had their lunches at the same time and filled the break room with about 90 people, elbow to elbow, and they all ate standing up. Literally, the next day after that happened, she sent out a follow-up email saying that we could eat at our desks, but she advised us to take a break from our work from time to time. It was pretty funny. What's the dumbest rule a school came up with? My 4 years of high school were full of my school trying out new policies and procedures to use in the future. My sophomore year, my school decided to make tests count for 100% of the grade and homework count for 0%, but it was still assigned. And as you'd expect, kids did absolutely no homework. The ones that didn't retain information well or were bad test takers struggled pretty hard to make the grade without homework padding it. Our failure rate was pretty high that year. Then my junior year, they brought homework grades back and made a new rule that there were no due dates, nor penalties for turning in late work for your 6 weeks. We didn't do quarters. As long as it was before the next 6 weeks started, you were good. This led to students doing no homework until the last few days of the 6 weeks, and teachers had to accept and grade them all before grades were due. This put teachers under immense stress by causing them to work insane hours and spend every hour at home grading, which made them very irritable and more likely to just shove pointless activities and busy work at us until they could finish grading. What's the wildest town rumor that turned out to be true? That a quiet and polite dude we knew growing up was a murderous and ruthless gang leader. We used to go to his parties, we saw him on the town, and always exchanged pleasantries. We would see him at the bar, and there was little indication he was not to be messed with, until one day we bumped into him in a parking lot. Again, exchanging pleasantries, how are you, what's going on this weekend, etc. A truck pulled up a couple of spots over. He said just a sec, and calmly walked over to talk to the guy. A short conversation ensued, and he opened the driver door and started pummeling the guy. Like on top of him in the driver's seat, punching down. We were stunned. After a short while, he got out of the truck and walked back to calmly finish his conversation with us, like nothing happened. We saw the truck pull away, so we think the guy lived. A few years afterwards, more rumors surfaced about him, and it made sense that they were true, until one day, his arrest made international headline news. He received a heavy sentence for a ton of different crimes. Likely won't ever be free, but his affiliates are still doing business.
What's your scariest moment waking up in the middle of the night? My wife, girlfriend at the time, was sleeping over at my house. I was dealing with a bit of insomnia at the time, so I was lying awake in the middle of the night when I heard something fall from my computer desk. For whatever reason, it scared me enough to hide under my blanket. Then all of a sudden, I hear your typical horror movie heavy breathing right in front of my face outside my blanket. I'm pretty much frozen in fear, listening to this breathing noise circling the bed, sort of. My wife starts to toss a little bit, and then rips her blanket off to get up to use the restroom. She shuffles towards the end of the bed to get down, and next thing I know, she screams with so much terror and instantly starts to cry, saying there's a little girl sitting on the floor at the edge of our bed. My next move was, I stood up on the bed and jumped off, probably as far as I can make it, towards the light switch. I asked what the hell she saw, and she just described seeing a girl in the fetal position, looking fairly distressed, look up at her when she was getting off the bed. I told her that I heard breathing outside my blanket right before she saw it, so needless to say, that light stayed on the rest of the night. What's your creepiest night in the woods story? My next door neighbor growing up was a friend of mine, and we had a kind of hangout spot in the patch of woods that ran behind our houses. We were about 14 and were experimenting with cigarettes, so that's where we went to hide. We were out there one day towards sunset and heard her grandmother calling to us. We panicked and put our cigarettes out so we wouldn't get caught, and as she called our names again, her voice sounded closer this time. That's when we realized that 1, her grandmother lived at least 3 hours away, and to our knowledge was not expected for a visit, and 2, the voice was coming from deeper into the woods, not from our backyards. We freaked and dashed out of the woods to the safety of our yards, and as we ran, we heard her call out one last time, but her voice sounded different this time, kind of deeper and angry sounding. We did not enter those woods ever again unless it was broad daylight, but we never heard anything like that again. Scariest experience of my life.
Viewer support is the best way for me to remain independent and continue bringing you these daily videos, which will always be here on my channels for you to watch absolutely free. So please consider subscribing to me on Rumble and on YouTube. Both will be linked in the description box down below. Thanks for listening, everyone. If you even somewhat enjoyed today's story, make sure to give this video a thumbs up, and if you really like it, consider subscribing to PattSun to never miss a future upload. Stay strong.